of faith. So, there we go. That is the way that we can learn, isn't it? From examples. That's the way that we learn a lot of things about Christianity from Christians. Some of us learn from our parents. Some of us learn from other people, teachers, just people we know in the church. That's what we learn about what Christianity means, by seeing it in action. So we've learned about worship through Abel. We've learned about preaching through Enoch, a preacher of righteousness. Those things are important to God. We've talked about Abraham, how faith sometimes moves us, takes us away from our home. We've talked about how it sometimes goes contrary to our senses, as Abraham was called upon to sacrifice his son, or to show willingness to that. Sometimes faith calls upon us to do things that don't seem sensible to us, but because of God's command and what we understand he wants of us, we do those anyway. And so those are some things that we talked about. Moses was the one, I think, that we just about finished last time. Moses was one who he was ready to lead the people out of Egypt to the promised land at one point in his life, but God wasn't ready to use him for that purpose then. We talked about that, how he was faithful to his people, and that was exemplary by faith in God, that he had plans for his people. He turned his back on a rich life, and identified with the people who were being persecuted, and thought, well, it's time for them to revolt and leave Egypt. But it wasn't God's time. He had 40 more years of training in the wilderness before God was ready to use him to lead the people out of Egypt. So that's kind of review. That's kind of where we were last time, wasn't it? We were talking about how when the people left Egypt, the Israelites left Egypt and headed for the promised land, it wasn't maybe all that they had thought, because as soon as they started moving, the Egyptians came after them. And so immediately they began to fear. It would have been better not to have left, because they're going to persecute us and kill people. But through faith, they crossed the Red Sea on dry land. Moses had to reinstill some faith in them. So again, faith there led them to do what they thought impossible, to cross a body of water on dry land. They couldn't conceive of it. And their faith caused them to follow someone who was urging them to do that. So those are some other elements of faith. Sometimes faith calls upon us to be leaders. Sometimes faith calls upon us to be followers, as the mass of the Israelites were. So there's a lot of aspects of faith that are illustrated in these examples. And there's probably some that might strike you as you look at these things. faith is something, these examples are not perfect people. Abraham was not perfect. Moses was not perfect. They're great examples, but of faith, but they weren't perfect. So that God can use people who aren't perfect. So that's kind of where we were. We're verse 29 of Hebrews chapter 11. By faith, the people passed through the Red Sea as on dry land, but when the Egyptians tried to do so, they were drowned. And that's a horrific scene. But
We've done this thing. If I'm not with your time, I want to go back to Moses again.
sure,
How did Moses got to know that he is a Hebrew?
well, his mother was his nurse. The daughter of Pharaoh called upon his mother to be his nurse growing up.
We don't know how long that relationship.
Yeah, we don't know exactly how long.
Yes, but the mother was in his nurse throughout the.
We don't know how long.
Habit.
Yeah, we don't know.
So I was thinking about
What do you think?
Through, God intervention in certain things. That blood is thicker than water, as Edes said.
Yeah,
When you are connected to something, you are connected to something. Because when he was in the field, while Moses and the Egyptian, the Hebrew and Egyptian are fighting, he did not mean to intervene because this is my brother. But what the Egyptian guy was doing to the Hebrews, that hates Moses to intervene in.
he saw him take advantage.
Yeah. That's it. But at the end of it, when the two Hebrews are fighting, still he wants to say, why the two of you as one people to love each other are fighting? And they rather got mad at him, who make you a judge over us. You see, that's then what came to my mind is, did Moses know then that he's a Hebrew?
I think it is,
Yeah.
because previously he'd stood up for the Hebrew who was being persecuted by the Egyptian.
Yes. Now, he is interviewing for these two Hebrew who are doing this. And that those two Hebrew, did they know that Moses is a Hebrew?
What's that?
The two Hebrews.
Yeah,
I don't know if you are getting me right. If we know that Moses is a Hebrew, then what he did previously, we will back him up. Or if you back me up, that means you know that I'm your brother.
right.
Secondly, if you see I and brother are fighting, so the two of you are brothers. Why are you fighting? And we turn up against you. Who make you judge over us?
Right.
Do we know that you are our elder brother in that society? Why we will turn against you?
We don't know what's in the mind of those two guys who was fighting, you know. It's hard to say.
That's the,
They knew he was kind of over them in a sense.
yeah,
They said, are you going to kill one of us like you killed the Egyptian?
The Egyptian.
Yeah.
You see, so if you study the thing, God did things in his wondrous way for you to believe his existence. His existence. Because that pushed Moses to see that, then if this news trump up, I'll be dead. Then let me run.
It's great.
We don't, it's a good question. How did Moses come to identify with the Hebrews? Was it through his mother? Was it through the daughter of Pharaoh? If she was a good adoptive parent, she would have told her adopted son, you're adopted. Well, I don't know if that was the case or not.
He was wrapped in a Hebrew blanket.
I don't know
I think
what
that,
he
well, that was
was.
in the movie anyway.
the,
And
uh,
I think he carried that blanket with him.
No,
in the
no,
movie
no.
anyway. But that might have- If that's true, then he.
No,
he-
no, no.
You don't know what blanket he had.
Oh, for in the movie, you can see even the younger fellow always refer him that you are not biological son. In the
No,
movie, that is in the
No,
movie.
that's-
He's
Yeah.
about 90% accurate. Anyway, I just remember that Hebrew blanket, he
No,
was wrapped in.
That's
put him in
not
the
in
It's
night.
not the Bible.
All right, I thought that was in the Bible. All right, they're taking license.
But it could be that God revealed it to him. It could be other Hebrew people came and.
He was obviously educated by somebody. I don't know.
Yes, yes.
Mhm.
Could be the Egyptians said, you know, you're a Hebrew
Yeah,
and
okay.
you're not like us. So the point is that he had the faith, he was looking for something better than the pleasures of being the son of Pharaoh's daughter.
It's more likely that it happened the other way around to me,
What's that?
that he wouldn't have been told immediately that he'd been adopted by Pharaoh's daughter, because that was kind of kept secret.
Well, yeah, although as he would grow, we don't know how long his mother was with him as nurse. You know, probably several years.
Because he was supposed to have been killed, right? She wasn't supposed to have flaunted that order.
Yeah.
Well, that's
It's more
right,
likely that
that's
he
right,
approaches a Hebrew and had no idea that he'd been adopted.
that's right. Anyway, you know, we look upon him as kind of, we don't look upon him as one who was identifying with the Hebrews as much as we should, perhaps. He identified with them as his true family. And so faith sometimes leads us to identify with a family that's different from what the world would say is our family.
And when
Jesus.
Pharaoh's daughter found Moses, she said, this is one of the Hebrew babies.
Yeah, she knew it.
Why would the Egyptians be doing that, right? Maybe
You
she
know,
put two and two together.
don't know, but you know, we're trying to learn what are examples that we can put into practice. So anyway, Moses had faith, and that we talked about last time, how he was the meekest man in the world because he did what God said consistently as leader of the Israelites. He was, I don't know if he was a charismatic leader or not, but he did what God said. That's what God looks for in a leader. Not somebody who can necessarily give a good speech or who looks like a leader, but someone who motivates people to do his will. So anyway, so then we get into the promised land at last. They have 40 years of wandering and not really somebody said they didn't really wander. And that's true. They were led by God day by day and night by night for 40 years. They didn't just go willy-nilly wherever. But anyway, when they finally got into the promised land, they passed over Jordan as they passed through the Red Sea on dry land. But then they encountered the people of the land, and the first major city on the west side of the Jordan was Jericho. And so by faith, the walls of Jericho fell after the people had marched around them for 7 days. There's a song about that, but I won't sing it. The walls of Jericho, right?
Oh, come on, give us a reference.
Joshua
We all heard.
Joshua fit the battle of Jericho, not fought. Anyway, the walls came tumbling down by faith after the people had marched around them for 7 days. Why was that a strategy? You would think that they would have employed some military stratagem that they later employed in other cities. Send a small force, lure the people of the city out, and then close in, surround them and burn the city. That's what happened at Ai, wasn't it? But here, the victory is achieved by just walking.
God wanted to show him his power.
I think so, yeah,
And it took a lot of faith for them to do that.
right,
They must have felt foolish.
right. Imagine what the people on the walls were looking,
Probably
maybe
laughing at
taunting
him.
him.
I bet they were.
What are you doing? But again, faith calls upon them to do something that may not have seemed reasonable to them, but that it was the will of God. And so they needed to rely upon the will of God. I don't know, maybe they were afraid to walk around the city of Jericho. Actually, probably the people inside were fearful because there was a lot of people walking around. Don't forget, there were 600,000 men. Don't know if
I imagine they were a little nervous.
yeah,
Nervous, nothing else.
but they would have been nervous too. And then to blow the trumpets and the walls came down. But I think that's the lesson there, isn't it? That sometimes God calls upon us to win a victory in an unexpected way. Maybe we're going to influence somebody that we didn't think we were going to influence. I don't know, are there some similar things that we're called upon to do sometimes? I don't, here, just the consistent obedience to God conquered a city. And sometimes, maybe that's just the lesson we need. Consistent living for God will touch the hearts of people around us and maybe conquer a soul and lead a soul to Christ.
The Bible states that they should walk, God told them to walk around 7 times, or they
Once a day for 7 days.
God speak to them to do that?
Yeah.
And then
That's
7 times on the 7th.
7 times around on the 7th day, wasn't it? Yeah.
That's obedience.
And then only not a minute before they completed all of that did the walls fall. But when they had done exactly what God told them to do, then the walls came falling down. So that's something to learn from them. Only that's true, when God, partial obedience doesn't lead to the result that God promises. You have to do exactly what he says. I was thinking of Naaman, who had to
7
dip himself in the Jordan 7 times. And
I
now,
think
after
those
6
are-
times, he still had leprosy.
I think those are things, historically, when Christians, you hear it, you have to know that if God said this is black, you don't need to paint it white
That's right.
to make it beautiful. No. I think that's how God is. If the thing you can see is very dirty,
Okay,
but if God say that thing, don't touch it, let it be dirty. Don't touch it. Don't think that, oh, this thing is for God, so the way it is, let me make it white so that it will look beautiful, or this kind of thing. You can see that these are things that is going on in the world right now. We turn the Bible down and we are framing a lot of words in the Bible, making it sound well to many people on different manner. You see? So, but as it is right now, see, people are walking, if you see people are walking through this building right now, somebody, tomorrow he will come and then just pass through the building and go. And tomorrow next, you see him pass through the building. You will just watch him and say, this guy, what is wrong with him? Every day he will come and pass there. But you don't know that what they believe in him, what is going on. You don't know anything about that.
Yeah.
But if you stay true the faith and the command that what you believe is telling you, know very well that it will work. And work exactly the way it is. See? So I think going forward, when you pass through that, you come to Saul the way he did with Agag, you see, go destroy the country, destroy everything there, even the children and their animals, everything. But when Saul got there, he said, oh, no, this fat cow, let me take it in. Worship God with it. Yes, it's a good initiative. To our mentality, is good initiative. Human mentality is good. Or is it not good? Yes, that I see a foul cow, you say I should go and destroy things, but I see what you like most. That when we were talking about Cain and Abel, we say Abel sacrifice was a very foul this thing, maybe a sheep or goat or whatever. That's why God accepted it. So Saul saw the foul cow and said that let me take this one and sacrifice it to God. But what God did to Saul, you see. So I think the obedience is very, very important in first way. If you say the word is S, you shouldn't make it S8, simply because we want to make it sound to somebody.
Yeah.
Well,
And someone else had faith at Jericho also, who's mentioned here. By faith, Rahab, the harlot or the prostitute in its version, had faith to hide the spies, and the faith that when they said, your family will be saved if you hang the scarlet ribbon from the wall. And the interesting thing about Rahab is that before the spies lay down for the night, she went up and said to them, I know that the Lord has given this land to you, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. We've heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the two kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan. Those word got around about that God was with the Israelites. And so they operated to too much of an extent on a spirit of fear. They needed to have a stronger trust in God. As we've seen, they were murmuring through their travels. But you would think, just having seen the Red Sea and some of the other miracles, that they wouldn't have had any doubt. But they did. And that's like us. We see and believe in the power of God, and yet sometimes we doubt. Sometimes we doubt that God is with us. Sometimes we doubt God's promises. We're fearful. Anyway.
Circumstances, right?
Rahab,
The circumstances, right?
what's that?
Circumstances make you doubt sometimes.
Yeah,
A lot of circumstances make you sometimes say, is it going to happen or not?
so faith moves Rahab to do something for this Lord God whom she's heard about, but it, kind of contrary to her own people. And they end up destroyed and she survives. So, and she survives to be one of the ancestresses of Jesus Christ in the genealogy of Jesus in Matthew chapter 1,
What
verse
about
5.
the untruths she told?
Well, yeah,
It wasn't perfect. For sure.
that's a good, she said to the people, well, they left, but they were hidden by
I
her.
don't know where they can.
Her profession wasn't exactly honorable either.
Yeah, that's right. She's not perfect.
Look at that too.
She's not perfect, and yet God uses her. That's been a kind of a question that I've had. What do you say if you're hiding? You know who Anne Frank is? Anne Frank. She was a Jewish woman who she and her family were hidden by a family, and during the Second World War, finally the Gestapo found out where she was and took her to a concentration camp, and she died there. But that's a story and she wrote a book, well, the diary of Anne Frank is
Had
taught
a movie out of it.
in this movie. But anyway, what do you say if you've got Anne Frank in your house and the Gestapo comes to the door and says, "You have any Jews in there?" What do you say?
I think that the people that housed her did the right thing, and eventually they got put in prison, I
Yeah.
think, for it too.
Yeah.
Because they got blamed. Somebody reported that there was a Jew in the house, they came, they found the hidden door, as I recall, and then the people got put in the Gestapo too, for the prison, Auschwitz or something. So, I think they did the right thing, I think that
Yeah, I think so too.
protecting innocent people
But
from
that's a tough choice.
evil.
Do you tell the truth? Is what I was getting at.
You know,
Or to say,
situation ethics.
maybe the answer is God doesn't put us in positions where we have to choose, to do wrong in order to get a good result.
It's
I
rare.
think that would be the answer, that God doesn't put us in
Pray that
those
he doesn't.
positions.
Well, I think that's where maybe his grace comes in and
Yeah,
covers something
Yeah.
like that would rarely ever
and
happen.
we pose questions like that. What should Rahab have said? Oh, I got the spies upstairs, I'm hiding them, they would have taken him and killed him, but,
Well, there's that one passage that says Jesus spoke in parables to sort of obscure
yeah,
the truth.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Apparently, there are sometimes reasons for that.
there's some questions there that,
If Rahab denounced them, then God failed them. God was became a failure. Because God knew very well that I will hide them somewhere.
yeah,
And he knew whom to use to hide them.
yeah,
But
that's right, that's right. He knew who to use. It wasn't an accident. So anyway, that's the faith of Rahab. Sometimes her faith led her to kind of step away from her own people because of this God. To the Hebrews. So, what more shall I say? She welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient. God has been patient with the Canaanites, but finally the judgment has come upon them. What more shall I say? I do not have time to tell about Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and the prophets. But we have time, right? We have time.
We have time.
Gideon, I do not have, these first, Gideon was a leader. What do we know about Gideon?
There's as much text devoted to his lack of faith as to the faith that he actually had.
Okay,
He demands so many proofs.
yeah, Gideon was a man of faith and courage, but he was a man of doubt. The Lord comes to him and says, we want you to lead the people to throw off the oppression of the Midianites. And Gideon's response, like so many, who, me? Me? And 4 times as he works toward God's goal, he says, give me a sign. Give me a sign. One time the angel sets fire to the food. two other, and then Gideon says, I want another sign. And what happens?
Gives them a sign.
Okay, what was it?
Police and the-
The fleece. One time in the morning, there's dew on the ground, but not on this fleece or sheepskin. And then the next morning, there's dew on the sheepskin, but not on the ground. Did I get them in the right order? Anyway, it's back in Judges. So he wanted those signs that this was really God's message and that God wanted him to do this. But that wasn't all. Finally, he's moved to raise an army. He raises an army of 32,000 men to rebel against the Midianites. How many did they have? We found out about 120,000. So we start at odds of 4-1 against. God says, that's not the odds I want. Tell anybody in your 32,000 man army that's afraid to go back home. So 22 out of the 32,000 go home. He's left with an army of 10,000. So the odds are 12-1 against. God says, those are still not the odds that I want, because you still might say, if you win the battle, that we did it. You know, it's possible to win a battle, where they've got 4 times the number of men. Or 12-1 is getting a little extreme, but God cuts his army to 300 through the who's going to lay down and drink water and who's going to kneel down and do it. But finally, with 300 men, he surrounds the Midianite camp. Well, what happens? He needs another sign. And so God leads him down to the border of the Midianite camp, and he hears a couple of Midianites talking in their tent and talking about how they were fearful and that the Lord was going to bring victory to the Israelites. And so he's finally encouraged to do what God says. He said, put your 300 men around the camp, then blow on your trumpets, uncover your torches, which you've got covered up. And that's all I want you to do. And then that, to me, that's the critical moment in Gideon's career. He has all of these signs that God is with him, but still in the night, he's got to raise that trumpet and blow it. And when he blows that trumpet, he doesn't know for sure that anybody else is going to do anything. It was possible, in spite of, he blows that trumpet, and all these other guys go home, and he gets arrested and tortured. When you're called upon to blow the trumpet, and you have, God gives us his promises. You have to, that's faith, isn't it? That when you blow the trumpet, that somebody's going to be behind you. And as it happened in his case, the 300 men did blow their trumpets and uncover their torches. And the Midianites, in spite of their great numbers, were afraid. They thought they were surrounded. So they run into each other and kill each other. And the battle is won. But that's the key moment when you're called upon to blow on the trumpet and you don't know if anybody else is going to really do it. They've said they will. God said they will. But that's faith, isn't it? Sometimes we do stand alone. And maybe we find out that there were some other people that agreed with us. And, that you didn't know were there. That's the way it often is, isn't it? If one person has the courage to obey God. That'll move others to have courage, but it takes someone to start it. And Gideon was the man that God wanted to start it. So, by faith, Gideon blew on the trumpet. What else do we know about Gideon? He was a man of faith in the sense they wanted to make him king. He said, no, I don't want to be king. Kind of like George Washington, right? They said, we want you to be king, but no.
That's smart.
God is your king. That didn't stop one of his sons from trying to be king, but on the other hand, he had an ephod that they made as kind of a memento that became an idolatrous thing that they had to get rid of later. He wasn't perfect. He had a lot of sons, some of which, well, at least one of which was not exemplary. Anyway, that's Gideon, but he's remembered, yeah, as a man who had some doubts. But when the time came, he blew on the trumpet. We'll talk a little bit more about his diplomatic skills later as we go on. We're taking our time, which is all right. Anything more that you want to say about Gideon?
If I want to ask a question, why did Gideon doubt the angel first? Why?
Well, he says, I'm the least of my tribe and my family is, you're calling on a nobody, God. You're not calling on the leader of the tribe to lead this revolt. He's just a nobody. But you're right. He had a sign. Why didn't he go forth boldly after that? But he's like so many of us. We hear a sermon and we trust in God's promises. But when it comes time to stand up for Christ, sometimes we're afraid.
Because he was tormented. The country, the Israeli was tormented by the, what do you call it?
Midianites.
Yeah, many years.
Yeah, but it had been for years.
Exactly.
That's
You
right.
see? So there is a fear in him that, yeah, and they know that time, there is a magicians around who show signs, this kind of things.
Yeah,
this kind of-
false prophets.
Gideon want to be sure that what you people are telling me is true or not.
Yeah.
You see, so that I will not take my people to face these people and then we will be destroyed because I believe you. So if Gideon want to be sure of what he is doing, not that he is doubting God himself. No, Gideon is not doubting God. That God cannot be. No, he believed. He said, Gideon had faith. He is courageous, and that's why even that time you cannot go to your farm. This time the Ammonites will come, the Midian will come to the farm and come and take your crop and this kind of things. But he always go to his farm and do all activities that he's supposed to do. But at the same time, he wants to be sure, truly, God has turned back to us. Is he you or not?
He's previously been called upon to tear down one of the altars of Baal. And his people are ready to give him over to the Midianites, but his father defends him and says, you're gonna cooperate with these people. The men of the town demanded, Joash, bring out your son, he must die, because he's broken down Baal's altar. But so he's been tested and proved faithful in that instance too. It's a longer story than just the big battle. Anyway, we're like that very much, aren't we? We need our courage bolstered from time to time. And one of the ways that we strengthen our courage is to look at people like Gideon. That's the point of this chapter. When we're having doubts and fears, we think of those instances in the past. So Well, maybe we have time for one more, right? At least because the next fellow who's mentioned is Barak. What do you know about Barak? Who is Barak?
Barak is also another word of Israel. Barak is not Israeli.
He's,
It was like a general of the army
Yeah.
at the time. I was just looking it up.
Yeah,
'cause I
no,
don't
that's-
remember either, but I looked at it.
you have to look him up because he's not one of the most well-known guys.
Deborah was a prophetess, so she was acting as a judge
Yeah.
at that time. And God commanded, or well, no, the Lord commands you to take these men and go and fight. And he said, well, if you go with me, I'll go, but if you don't go with me,
Yeah.
I won't. And so she said, well, okay, I'll go with you, but you're not gonna get credit for winning the battle. It's going to go to a woman.
So he kind of comes off as not good because, she told him to go and he was, equivocating and come with me. And yet he's the guy whose name is mentioned in Hebrews as a man of faith. Because he did raise an army and he did lead the Israelites to overcome those who had oppressed them. This was during the time of the judges when there was a cycle of disobedience and oppression followed by redemption through one of the judges. And so this is the fourth judge.
According to chapter 2, it's a judge is a deliverer. A judge is not a judicial judge. A judge may not be, the leader of the people per se, but one who delivers, delivers the people. That's in chapter 2, clearly defined, that God rose up judges to deliver the people. I want to make that clear because there's misunderstandings. Unfortunately, it's well, to correct, some have argued and said, well, Barak is the judge here. The word is not used with Barak.
That's right. Deborah was the one.
It is the verb, try to put this because people don't know their grammar. The verb, which is used as a participle, is used with Deborah to show some sort of difference between Deborah and the men. Okay, and I'm trying to bring that out. We need to read very carefully chapter 4 and chapter 5 to get the larger picture. Okay, between Deborah and Barak. Okay, because people continue to misunderstand these two this chapter by because Deborah is not a deliverer. This is their argument. Some people's argument. Well, Deborah's not a deliverer, so her skills lie in judicial, but that's not in 4 or 5.
Yeah.
Okay, what I'm trying to argue is that, and I'm trying to avoid getting out of spending too much time with Deborah. That I would go as far as to say that she was a military propagandist or even a military recruiter, because her role appears to be to encourage the Israelites, to fight, Jabin.
She was leading at that time.
Well,
That's what this said.
I don't agree with the NIV translation because, if you check other translations, they don't, the more literal translations
Judging.
do not necessarily agree with the NIV's translation.
Judging is another translation. But the point about Barak here is he says, if you come, I'll come. She said, okay, you won't
Right,
get the
loses-
credit. Who got the credit? Not Deborah,
Jail.
this other lady.
Yeah,
For
she's
killing the
called,
general.
she's called the Blessed Woman by Deborah.
Yeah,
In the Song of Deborah, chapter 5, Deborah calls her, she's a blessed woman.
But here, before we go, let's read one verse. Deborah said to Barak, go. This is the day the Lord has given Sisera into your hands. Has not the Lord gone ahead of you? She says, go. So Barak went down Mount Tabor, followed by 10,000 men. At Barak's advance, the Lord routed Sisera and all his chariots and army. And we could say, well, Barak, he only moved when Deborah told him to do it. But he's remembered as a man of faith because he did that. Sometimes we need a little push. Barak is a man who needed a little push, maybe more than a little push, in order to do God's will. But he's remembered as a man of faith. And so that's a lot of us. We do because we needed a little push, but God sees that and remembers that as an act of faith also. So that's encouraging to me, because sometimes I've needed a little push to do the right thing. But God notices that.
You all need a little push, that's why I have preachers.
Yeah, that's why we
Give
have
us a little
preachers.
push, like Barry
To
was
give
doing
us
this
a
morning.
little push.
He made a couple of points there that we all need to keep in mind to move us forward.
So Barak was one of those who needed a push, but he's remembered as an example of faith. We'll go on with that list of more obscure fellows. Jephthah, I think, is next. Jephthah,
Samson.
Samson is, okay, I'm sorry, all right. Samson and Jephthah, both seriously flawed men, and yet they're remembered in this list, along with Abraham and Moses.
It's perfectly chronological.
No, it's not perfectly chronological. Anyway. Samson, there's movies about him. And,
Good week. Have your kids been calling you?
I've been getting a few text messages, but
uh,
no phone calls.
okay, good to see you.
Lydia, where are you headed?
Bye, Ellen. Bye,
Okay.
Michelle. It's Linda.
Which town, where again? Where is it? Hollister, okay. One of those big towns, huh? No. Okay, good to see you.
No.
I love it. Ron Sampson, when Delilah's on with Ron Sampson